At Professional Risk Management Services, our medical liability insurance program for psychiatrists and behavioral health group practices, the Psychiatrist Program, is designed to meet your needs throughout the various stages of your career. As a national psychiatry-specific program, a policy with PRMS can cover child and adolescent, forensic, early career, and military psychiatrists, as well as moonlighting residents and fellows, part-time practitioners, and telepsychiatrists. Learn more about how PRMS can protect you.
So good evening, everyone. Welcome to WPS podcast. My name is Dr. McDaniel. I am a PGY1 psychiatrist in training here at Howard University in DC. I'm from originally East Orange, New Jersey. And just a little bit about myself for fun. I like to, when I do have time off, of course, I like to go to the gym, and I'm a big fan of basketball, so I watch a lot of basketball. Big time Celtics fan, so go Celtics. And it is with great pleasure that I'd like to introduce the interviewee here, interviewee of honor, the guest of honor, Dr. Eliot Sorel. Dr. Eliot Sorel is an innovative health leader, health systems performance expert, practicing physician, and clinical professor of global health policy, management, psychiatry, and the behavioral sciences at George Washington University. So today I'll be interviewing Dr. Eliot Sorel. This is the WPS podcast. Just a quick tidbit about WPS. It's the Washington Psychiatric Society. It's been around for about 75 years now. Actually, just had our 75th anniversary. It was created to bring together the psychiatrists of the area collaboratively. And under the WPS is the CLM, which was a branch created to as a bridge, in a sense, to sort of connect mentors with young psychiatrists in training in an effort to bridge the gap and provide some sort of mentorship and essentially tutelage in the field. So without further ado, Dr. Sorel, I'm so glad to have you here. And Dr. Sorel himself was actually the founder of the CLM. And Dr. Sorel, do you want to tell us a little bit about what made you want to create the CLM?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. McDaniel. I want to congratulate first Dr. Swarty for this innovative idea of starting the podcast, and also to congratulate him to be the first CLM member to become president of the Washington Psychiatric Society. We started the CLM in 2008. In fact, we launched it in January 2008 on Dr. Swarty as a resident at St. Elizabeth. And the idea was precisely what you suggested, Dr. McDaniel, to create a set of relationships between our residents, fellow members of WPS, early career psychiatrists, and senior psychiatrists to explore areas of collaboration and to develop joint projects. And we've done some of those under the CLM over the years, including educational programs, research programs, and most recently collaborated, of course, in the celebration of the 75th anniversary of WPS.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Sorel. So again, some of you are obviously newcomers, as this is only our second podcast, so the bulk of you are newcomers. So the purpose of this interview is obviously to provide you all with an opportunity to meet one of the creators of CLM and be introduced to himself, Dr. Eliot Sorel. As I introduced him before, several accolades that he has, and very prominent in the field of psychiatry. So, Dr. Sorel, I'm glad to have you here, and I'm wondering, before we get started with your accolades and several accomplishments, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to tell us a little bit about your background, where you're originally from, what college you went to, and even what sparked your interest in psychiatry.
Sure, glad to. Thank you for the opportunity to do so. I did my, first of all, I was born in Romania, and my first 10 years in America were in New York. I did my medical school in New York, and then did my psychiatric training at Yale. And my very first job after finishing my psychiatric training at Yale was to develop a mental health clinic within a family health center. And that formative postgraduate experience, postgraduate experience after Yale was really formative in the path that I have taken in my career, having done so work in the West Indies. This job was in the U.S. Virgin Islands. I was fortunate to go there, invited. I was in my last year at Yale when one of my significant mentors in my life was a Scottish psychiatrist named Maxwell Jones, who was the founder of the therapeutic community. And he told me that he got a terrific grant from New York State to be involved in developed services in the Virgin Islands. Would I join him? And my then girlfriend, and then who became my wife, said, let's go, let's go. So we made first a visit, and then we decided indeed to go. And it was really a wonderful formative experience. And I took that opportunity with gusto. So every day that I was there, I was thinking how I could make this a better place. And 6 weeks into it, unannounced, arrived the governors of the Virgin Islands, accompanied by the health minister and a few other doctors. And after touring the facilities, Governor King looks at me and says, Dr. Sorel, is there anything I can do to help you?
Oh.
I was ready. I said, yes, sir. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He looks at me and says, Dr. Sorel, you may not get all of those, but you have to do one more thing. You will have to convince our parliament that what you are proposing will be good for our people. That was really a wonderful formative experience for me. This was the first time that I learned something I did not learn in my residence at Yale, namely the interface between medicine and policy-making, decision-making at a political level. That lesson has stayed with me and has been projected throughout my career in everything I've done since at the interface between psychiatry, medicine, and public health and health policy. So, in fact, he was right. I did not get everything, but I got most everything of what I requested.
Yeah, I can imagine that to be an awesome experience. I can only anticipate my first job after residency being able to go to the Virgin Islands. It does sound like you had to do a lot of hard work, and I'm glad that you got an opportunity to do that. It sounds like it was a very formative time in your career for sure. And so I have to say that I actually knew about that first job that you have. I've done my research on you, Dr. Sorel. I've been reading about you for some time now. And in my research, obviously, as I said before, I found a lot of information on all your accolades, all your awards, all the things you've done, both for psychiatry and the community at large. But I was surprised, very, very surprised. I actually came across an interesting picture of you. And if it's all right with you, if it's not too invasive, I'd mind sharing that picture with some of our viewers. Is that okay?
It's okay.
All right. So give me a
Now
second.
I'll have to say something afterwards, after your show.
Okay. Let me share my screen really quickly. So here you can see this picture of a young Dr. Sorel off to the left, or some of you it might be to the right over here with the very luxurious afro, I might add. I'm almost envious. As you can see, I'm not as fortunate to grow such hair at this time in my life. But tell us a little bit about this picture, if you will, Dr. Sorel.
Sure. This was the day I was referring to, the day when the governor, the gentleman in the white hair in the middle, front row in the dark suit, right? That's him, Dr. Sorel King, arrived unannounced and toured the facility and then asked me what he can do for me. And I told him, and he coached me what I need to do. And I wanted to add one more thing that I learned, a very important thing that I learned that became really a kind of a guiding principle. Remember what I mentioned, this mental health clinic was in the context of a family health center. So from the very beginning, right after finishing my training, I was keenly aware of the need to integrate mental health in a project of total health. So we work very closely, not only with our colleagues from the rest of the Medical Center, but also with the public health nurses, the public health workers. So from the very early youth of my professional life, I had this guiding experience of the integration of primary care, mental health, and public health. And fast forward several years later, in recent years, in fact, I developed a model that is rooted in that early experience that I call total health, integrating primary care, mental health, and public health.
Yeah, so I think that that was interesting that even then you knew that at some point integrative and total care would become necessary. I think that oftentimes with psychiatry especially, it's overlooked. Psychiatry sometimes is placed on the outer rim of healthcare outside of the other medical practices. But I think, as you mentioned before, it's something that needs to be understood and integrated into all the other medical practices as well. I think to work on one part of someone means you need to address the entire part of someone, and I think that that's important.
Yeah, I want to share one more thing that relates to this that anteceded my Yale experience. When I was a medical student in New York, uh, one of the rotations that I was in for about I think a month was part of medicine, but it was a subset of medicine, was so-called psychosomatic diseases. So psychosomatic diseases happen to have patients that had both physical presentations and psychological presentations. So I happen to really like that a lot. I thought that made a lot of sense looking at the whole person, not just separate diseases, but a person that had multiple conditions but dealt with together. And I'm immensely and eternally grateful to my mentor of that time, Franz Reichsman, was a professor I had on that rotation, who kind of instilled in me the excitement of that integration of those issues in psychosomatic medicine, as was Maxwell Jones in systems, and as Governor King kind of stimulated with the challenge of interacting with policy. So I had 3 stars, so to speak, that stimulated my early development. Dr. Reichman in medical school, Maxwell Jones right afterwards, and of course, Governor King.
Yeah, very cool. I'm wondering, Dr. Sorel, what at the beginning of medical school were you interested in psychiatry at that time, or is it something you came to be interested as time progressed?
Well, I think the kernel, the seed for psychiatry was planted in that psychosomatic clerkship.
Gotcha.
That month in medicine got me interested. It began to stimulate my interest in the psychological aspects of illness, not just psychiatric illness, but psychological aspects of illness, period, and of health. So that kind of seed for interest in that field was kind of developed in that second year in medical school in the medicine. In fact, not as the psychiatric clerkship as much as in the psychosomatic medicine part of the medicine component, which in a sense, if you look back and look forward, made a lot of sense in terms of my current interest in total health.
Yeah,
So they resonate with each other.
absolutely. I think I think that that's been relevant just in one glimpse of your resume. I've been able to see that you've had a extremely fruitful career in psychiatry and in global health generally. So I do understand what you mean, and I think that what goes hand in hand with a fruitful career and the experiences and the journey is the people that you meet along the way. And as you explained, and as I've come to understand, several individuals have impacted your career and interests. One of those people, who I'm sure of, is the late Dr. Charles Pierce. So, from what I understand, the two of you worked together. Is that correct?
Yes, we were friends, and in fact, in the 1990s, the way we met actually first at the Grand Rounds at Howard, actually,
Wow.
in the 1980s. Dr. Pierce and I first met at Howard in the mid 80s. I had just come back from the Virgin Islands just a few years before, and we established that the then the chairman at Howard, Dr. James L. Collins, invited me to establish a grand rounds with a focus on transcultural psychiatry, knowing that I had just came back from the Virgin Islands. And it was at Howard that Dr. Pierce and I met in the mid-1980s during the chairmanship of Dr. Collins, and remained friends ever since. And then in the late 1990s, when my son was going to apply to colleges, was a high school graduate, he invited us to spend a day at Harvard with him. He was a professor of psychiatry at Harvard, and I was trying to convince my son to apply to go to Harvard. So he really was a very generous and elegant host. We spent a day with him. We toured the facilities, and he really was a wonderful day we spent together. I also got to know him better, and you should know that he was one of the first African-American football players in his youth in the Harvard football team. And at that time in the 1950s, America was quite segregated. And the Harvard football team was to play UVA in Charlottesville. So they found out that they had an African-American player. They said to them, "You can't come." So Harvard said to them, "Oh, we're not coming. Without Charles Pierce, we're not coming." So UVA relented. And Dr. Pierce was the first African-American football player to play below the Dixon-Mason line. Quite an accomplishment in the 50s. Dr. Pierce and I remained in touch, and then he had a vision of creating a global network of African American and people of African origin psychiatrists, to create a global network of African psychiatrists and African Americans and people from different cultures to serve the world. So the vision was to create such a group by calling for a meeting of all of them at Harvard in 2002. And he invited me to be one of his advisors, which I gladly accepted. Yeah. Regretfully, that vision didn't quite take hold right then. But fast forward 10 years later, when I launched my book on global mental health, and they invited me at Harvard to present my book, I asked my colleagues, whatever happened with Chet's vision about the Black diaspora of psychiatrists? They said nothing. And I said, well, we must do something about it. And they said, well, will you help us? I said, of course. I'll do this glad. I was friends with Chet. Do that, of course, anytime. So at that time, just a year or so afterwards, the World Bank and the World Health Organization convened a high-level meeting in Washington with a focus on health and development, mental health and development. And I was invited to be one of the presenters at that meeting. So I reached out to my colleagues at Harvard. I said, this is the moment to do something in that universe that Chet had a vision. So I created one brief concept paper, one-pager, the idea of creating the Africa Global Mental Health Institute, putting it on the agenda of this meeting of the World Bank and WHO, and then hopefully take it forward. They agreed. Three of us co-authored it, and Dr. Henderson, who is now chairman at the BU, and another colleague from Harvard, the three of us co-authored it. Greg Friccioni was the other colleague. And then we decided to rekindle that initial meeting of 2002 and convene the second Black diaspora of psychiatrists in Africa, in Cape Town, in the fall of 2017. And at that meeting, the then president of APA, Arthur Stewart, was there as well, because there was a WPA meeting taking place, and Dr. Sol Levin, the medical director. And I had a few moments alone with them, and I proposed to them, I dared to propose to them the following idea. The Human Rights Award at the APA had no name. I said, Arthur, Sol, what about if we name this Human Rights Award in memory of Chet Pierce, who had just died the year before? They agreed. But it took us 5 years to do it. We did it, we endowed it, and now Chester Pierce Human Rights Award is a nice legacy in memory of my friend.
Oh, that's truly incredible, and inspirational story, Dr. Sorel. And as I know, Dr. Pierce, he was also a very prominent figure in the creation of what was known as Sesame Street.
He was an advisor to Sesame Street. He was a co-founder of the Black Psychiatrists of America, together with a prominent Washington psychiatrist, Dr. Charles Proudhon.
Incredible. Yeah, I know that recently the Washington Psychiatric Society, we just gave at the 75th gala, we gave the Charles Perdomo Award actually. Um, if you recall that and want to speak a little bit about that as well.
Sure. I came across the work of Dr. Charles Proudhon as I was doing research for the Chester Pierce Human Rights Award endowment. In the process of trying to raise funds for it, I did some research to find out who else worked with Dr. Pierce and came across Dr. Proudhon, who really had not been properly recognized. He challenged the APA in 1954 on the issue before the Supreme Court of Brown versus the Board of Education. He said to the APA should join as a friend of the court, an amicus curiae, to advocate in favor of stopping this discrimination. And APA turned him down, 1954. APA said, we're a scientific professional organization. We don't get into policy and advocacy. Well, now in the 21st century, policy and advocacy is part of the mission of the APA and is part of the mission of WPS. So having realized what an important, huge print had on American psychiatry, Dr. Proudhon, I proposed to the immediate past president of WPS that we established, Anne-Marie Dietrich, that we establish the Charles Proudhon Human Rights Award in the Washington Psychiatric Society. And I invited my good friend, Dr. Connie Dunlap, to join me in this proposal. And the two of us co-authored the proposal that the board then approved. And as you know, we were fortunate to have an extraordinary first honoree, Dr. Ruth Shim, that we celebrated at the 75th anniversary.
Yeah, the WPS Gala was awesome. I'm sure some people here were actually in attendance, and I look forward to the one that we have next year. I'm sure it'll be even bigger and even better. I think it'll be a great time. So Dr. Sorel, I know just in looking at your history, a lot of your work, as I said before, is globally and it spans the nation, but it seems like everything you've done kind of centers around a common mission, and I think that mission, well, to me at least, has been to address healthcare and the challenges that you observed all around. I mean, you worked in all parts of the world with all parts of life. It reminds me of a phrase that you used in one of our conversations. You said we were speaking about integrative care, and you said one of the motivating forces you had was for human rights, and that you also said that human rights or healthcare was a human right, and you said with that in mind, it should be affordable to everyone. And I'm sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but I remember how you told me that, and that actually brings me to another picture that I want to show. And this is from a thank you card that you actually got from President Obama himself because you had the opportunity to work with him on the Affordable Care Act. And so here it's from your participation with the Affordable Care Act. It says, together we reduce the cost of care. We established the toughest patient protections in history. We achieved the dream of generations. High quality, affordable health care is no longer the privilege of a few, but a right of all. My apology. It says that our generation is able to succeed in passing this reform is a testament to the persistence and the character of the American people who championed this cause, who mobilized, who organized, who believed that people who love this country can change it. From President Barack Obama to you.
Well, you've got to show the picture.
Yeah, I'm going to show that picture in just a second of him and his dog as well. And so here you have a picture of Barack Obama at the White House with his dog given to his dog Bo, actually signed by him and given to you. Would you mind telling us a little bit about your experience working with the Affordable Care Act?
Sure. I cherish that involvement. I was very excited because all throughout my medical school years, residency, my work in the overseas in America, access to care has been a major stumbling block in the United States, the richest country. And I was so inspired that President Obama made this one of his highest priorities of his presidency, and he succeeded in passing this act. Now, we can't sort of rest on our laurels. I believe, I need to double check this, but I believe that the Affordable Care Act legislation may be expiring next year.
Mm.
So we need to redouble our efforts to maintain it and to enhance it. So what happened in that period of 2009, President Obama invited the doctors and members of the community to participate in community groups to advise him how should this be implemented. And I was privileged to be invited to one of these groups that I participated in and provided our feedback to the president and his team. And they accepted most of the things of what we recommended. And inspired by that act and challenged by the things that followed, within a year or two, there were already rumblings of destroying it in Congress. So concerned about that, I organized a symposium on the Affordable Care Act at the Cosmos Club with the president of the National Academy of Medicine, with Dr. David Satcher, the former Surgeon General, and a few other people. And we created a document to showcase the importance of maintaining the Affordable Care Act. But as we anticipated, a lawsuit was started that ended up before the Supreme Court, in 2015, trying to abolish the Affordable Care Act. And a group of us from around the country, about 100 of us, joined and did what Dr. Prodom recommended in 1954, an amicus curiae. We did an amicus curiae, a Friends of the Court letter advocating for preserving the Affordable Care Act. And, gratefully, we and others who advocated for it prevailed. And the court did not, demolish the Affordable Act in 2015. It happened again 5 years later, again an attempt to demolish it. We mobilized again, another amicus curiae, we prevailed again. Now I'm concerned what's coming up now, because it relates to who's going to be the next president, is going to have an impact onto what's going to happen next year with the Affordable Care Act. So between all these activities in 2017, in the APA Assembly, and Dr. Dunlap participated in that with me, we introduced an action paper titled Access to Care, Including Mental Health Care, is a Human Right. So that is a policy of the APA. But it's necessary to be policy of the APA, but it isn't sufficient. It has to be policy of the United States. So now that likely there's going to be a third attack against the Affordable Care Act coming up, we need to brace ourselves to defend it, to protect it, and to make sure that it remains enshrined forever, not just a few years.
Yeah, undoubtedly so. And I can say that I am proud to know someone who participated in this, as well as fought for it despite the adversity that was thrown at you. I've also benefited from it as well, being in medical school and not having access to funds at a period in time. The Affordable Care Act helped provide me with reasonable health insurance to take care of myself. So Dr. Sorel, I know that we've talked about at least a lot of your accolades, but I think what might be interesting to some of the viewers as well is just personally in your pursuit to psychiatry, what are some of the challenges you faced? And if you could advise some people who are interested in this field, or even currently in this field looking to progress in a certain way, what sort of advice would you offer them?
Well, first, I think, let me give you an example. We included one of our CLM members, in fact, in this project. We did a research project. I think you need to think about, when you think professionally, don't specialize too early. try to get a sense of the field. It'd be one advice. Our field is one of the very generous field to be involved in a number of ways. You
Mhm.
could be involved in delivering clinical services. You can be involved in doing research. You can be involved in doing education and training. You can be involved in addressing policy. You can be involved in addressing advocacy. I've been blessed and fortunate to have been involved in all these 5 areas in different degrees and
Yeah.
at different times in a balanced way. At times, one prevailed over the other, but it has really been for me and for my interest and my creativity. I feel blessed to have had the opportunities I've had, to have had the mentors I've had, and the patients. I'm eternally grateful to my patients for allowing me to and contributing to my development as a psychiatrist, and who appreciated my interest across these areas. And I think our patients appreciate us not only as clinicians, but also as their advocates. It's
For
a very
sure.
important role for physicians to be advocates for our patients. So think about the richness of opportunities
Mhm.
across these 5 areas: clinical, education and training, services, policy, and advocacy. And if you want to do just one, that's fine. If you want to do two, terrific. If you're blessed to taste all 5, even if it's up your alley and you're interested, go for it. So I'll give you an example of a small, discrete, but useful research project we did that involved, in fact, a CLM member as well.
Mhm.
Because of my passion and interest in comorbidity, and comorbidity, by the way, abounds in medicine. There are
Absolutely.
very few non-communicable diseases that occur alone. Most people who have non-communicable diseases have at least 2. Many
Mhm.
have 3. Some
Mhm.
have even more. So comorbidity needs to be something that should be better addressed in medical school and better addressed in psychiatric residency. It is not at the moment. I kind of developed this interest, partly stimulated by my old mentor in second year of medical school in psychosomatic medicine. And that month, he planted a seed that led to my interest in the issue of comorbidity and integrated care. So comorbidity is a very important issue. So I was invited by the World Psychiatric Association to organize a congress in my old country in Romania
Mhm.
in 2013 and then 2015. In anticipation of the 2015 Congress, I decided we should also do a research project and present it at that Congress. So what we did, we invited colleagues from China, India, Iran, and Romania to do a very discrete project at primary care clinics
Mhm.
to screen for comorbid conditions, depression, anxiety, and what other medical conditions they are comorbid with. And we were fortunate to get colleagues who were quite interested at primary care clinics. So they each had to we had the medical history in the charts of the patients. We just had to administer the PHQ-9 and JD7 and combine the existing medical evidence from the chart with the results of the PHQ-9 and JD7. And, no surprise, comorbidity was huge. And interestingly, for both genders, with one exception, there was one country where the women had a higher rate of comorbidity than in the other countries. Would you care to guess which country?
I'm wondering if that was America or
No,
country.
no, we didn't do America. We did China, India, Iran, and Romania.
Likely Iran.
Right, spot on. What led you to think that way? But you're right. That's exactly right.
I just think likely the conditions. I think that in a place like Iran is probably a more rigid society in terms of how females are allowed to represent themselves and that sort of thing. I could see how that would impact mental health and that sort of thing, and then
Right.
probably more as well. Yeah.
Well, you're right. We did not analyze why, but that was the data. So now we would like to, we're beginning to explore doing a similar project on a larger scale and maybe doing it in the Americas, in our hemisphere. And if you want to participate, we'll keep you involved.
Yeah. I think that that's something I would love to participate in because I'm even wondering now, hearing you talk, I'm thinking about what comorbidities are probably most prevalent alongside depression. What other illnesses may exist?
Right. Well, you may think of doing something perhaps even at Howard with the
Yeah,
family medicine department.
yeah, I've begun to notice even in my short time here that people come in with a whole host of things. No assessment and plan has only one diagnosis. As we come from time to time to see, it's always easily five or more, and depression never sits alone.
Right.
Often that impacts people's ability to take care of themselves, which I could also see as a cascade effect. Okay, so Dr. Sorel, we've had a great chat here about you, about some of the things you've done, about your interests as well. I'd love to use this time as an opportunity for you to tell me a little bit about what's coming next for WPS. What are you anticipating, as well as CLM, obviously? What do you see on the horizon in the next year or so? Some projects that you may be looking forward to, or anything like that?
Well, first of all, I want to reiterate my congratulations to Dr. Suardi. It gives me great pleasure that one of the first members of the CLM is now the president of WPS.
Very
Dr.
cool.
Suardi was there at the launch of the CLM at St. Elizabeth Hospital in January 2008. And at that time, on that cold day in January, 28th of January 2008, I was driving to St. Elizabeth with Dr. Roger Peel, a long-standing member and esteemed colleague and member, former Speaker of the Assembly. And he was fessing up to me saying, Eliot, it's so difficult now to get people to volunteer to run for office in WPS. So I said to him, we're starting the CLM tonight. One day, these young people will be the leaders of the WPS. So it gives me great pleasure to see Dr. Suardi now in embodying that vision. And I hope that others who are in the CLM and are in the CLM will follow Dr. Suardi's example and get involved in WPS in Area 3, where Dr. Dunlap is now the chair of is the representative for the Area 3 Assembly, and in the APA. I think we need to think about the issue, the importance of young people and creating the next generation of leaders is extremely important. One of the major mistakes that major organizations make, including business organizations, they do not prepare for leadership transitions.
Mm.
We need to nurture leaders. I think the Democratic Party of the United States is going through that right now. They don't have young leaders, and that's a major problem for the country. So in WPS, we've created the CLM with that idea to be a hub for future leaders in the areas of their choice, be it clinical, research, education, policy, or advocacy. And we appreciate you, Dr. McDaniel. I remember I was very pleased to hear last year you were enthusiastic about joining the CLM and participating, and delighted to do this program with you this evening, and would like to engage with you and your colleagues with ideas of what would you like us to do in the coming year.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to some of the things that are on the horizon. I don't know if I can speak too soon or candidly about some of the things we have planned, but I know we look forward to bringing in some of the incoming residents soon in order to introduce them, one, to the city as well as to the program. So I'm looking forward to that this summer.
I'm glad you mentioned the city. We are truly blessed to be in Washington, D.C. I love the city. I love its cultural diversity, its opportunities for intellectual and cultural experiences, the beautiful nature that surrounds us, and we should take advantage of it. And I think, as you and I have discussed, we have done in the past, we've welcomed the PGY1s when they come. So hopefully one of the projects that the CLM could do this summer or early fall is to welcome the PGY1s. We've done it, the last time we did it was at the APA with the help of the APA Foundation. So this could be one of the projects that we could start planning immediately with Dr. Suardi and with you and the CLM.
Absolutely. I look forward to a good time at the wharf down at the APA down at the wharf. I think that would be pretty cool. But at this time, Dr. Sorel, I'd like to open it up to some of the viewers and people present for the podcast. If anyone has any questions that they'd like to present to us at this time.
Dr. McDaniel, there is one question in the chat. If you want, I can hold that for you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Dr. Sorel and Dr. McDaniel, excellent interview and very nice rapport. Dr. Sorel, you are clearly a visionary and
Sure.
ambassador for psychiatry throughout the world. My question is this: what charge do you have for WPS and for the APA as we enter a new era with Dr. Marquita Wills as our CEO and medical director at the helm, accompanied by Dr. Viss and Dr. Miskman as APA president and president-elect?
Well, thank you very much for your kind comments, Dr. Dunlap.
Absolutely.
As you know, the incoming president of the APA, that is now president, was incoming in April, has chosen to focus on lifestyle and health, which is up the alley of total health, which I'm very excited about it. And I should reveal it's premature, but since we are home in the WPS home, I'll reveal the secret. One of the things I'm working on for the APA meeting in Los Angeles, I decided that I think Western medicine has made huge progress in fighting disease, in extraordinary surgical interventions, but Western medicine was anteceded by millennia old medicines around the world, particularly in China and India. Traditional Hindu Ayurveda medicine and Chinese medicine anteceded Western medicine. And so I reached out to an Indian colleague and a Chinese colleague, and the three of us are exploring of doing a symposium, if the scientific committee will agree to it, to look at what are the lessons we can learn from traditional medical practices of India and China that are relevant to 21st century illnesses that affect all of us, including climate change, non-communicable diseases, and so forth. Specifically, more closely home to the APA, I think having a new leadership is really a wonderful time to take stock of what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses. I would hope that the new CEO, Dr. Marquita Wills, will engage in a series of listening sessions. I think would be important for the incoming CEO, who has not been at the helm of the APA until now, to learn as to what is going on in the APA from the area councils, from the members, and to bring that data of what she's learned to the Board of Trustees as they develop a new strategic plan for the APA for the next 5-10 years, where both the resident fellow members, the early career psychiatrists, the leaders of the area councils have an opportunity to talk to the CEO leisurely of the whole country over the next 4 to 5 months and create a joint report to be considered by the Board of Trustees. What should be the aims of the APA in the next 5 to 10 years based upon these listening sessions that the CEO will do with members and leaders? That's one thing I would recommend to start with. I may have other ideas, but I would, if she does just that, that would be terrific. Because I think the members often have felt disenfranchised. Some members have resigned from the APA as a result of it. So it's an opportunity for a reset, for a new beginning. And I think Dr. Wells has the intelligence, the experience, and has the opportunity for a new path in the APA of leadership, membership, and to truly be a leading professional organization in the American landscape.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Sorel. So there's some other questions are kind of beaming through the chat right now. Particularly, I have a question from Dr. Swarty. He says, thank you, Dr. Sorel and McDaniel, for this great conversation. He says, Dr. Sorel, can you tell us about some of your work in psychiatry and international affairs, lessons learned, and recommendations for those of us who share this interest of yours?
Thank you, Dr. Swarty. I know that you are a passionate track to diplomacy advocate. So in that spirit, I would be delighted to share with you and with colleagues who may not know about this. You know, in 1990, right after the Berlin Wall fell, we were extremely excited of the sense of freedom that the fall of the Berlin Wall brought about. And we proposed to the World Psychiatric Association that they establish the conflict management and conflict resolution section, because we anticipated, although the elation of the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Soviet Empire was a reality, we anticipated that other conflicts will arise and that psychiatrists have a special role to play as part of a team in addressing local, regional, and even world conflicts. So the executive committee of the World Psychiatric Association entertained our proposal. And in fact, the conflict management and conflict resolution section was established and is going strong. And now we need to also congratulate Dr. Suardi again. He's now the co-chair, in fact, of that section of the World Psychiatric Association. And we hope, Dr. Suardi, that through your leadership of that section, together with the Leadership Council, psychiatry will play an important role. Now, additionally, with the war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza, there have been a lot of heated discussion in the APA about the involvement of psychiatrists in assisting with the resolution of these conflicts in a timely manner. Of course, we are not the policy makers, we are not the decision makers. And one of our colleagues in New York, Dr. Gary Belkin, suggested that we established a new caucus in the APA, namely the Caucus on Peace, Conflict, and Psychiatry. Regrettably, the reference committee of the APA declined to accept their application, although more than 50 members of the APA signed for that established the caucus and suggested that they become part of the Global Mental Health and Psychiatry Caucus that I established 10 years ago. I respectfully disagree with the reference committee of the APA. I think peace, conflict, and psychiatry deserves and needs to be a separate caucus and not be an appendix to the Global Mental Health and Psychiatry Caucus. And by the way, I'd also like to, in this context, to congratulate Dr. Ron Bailey, who's done a terrific job in leading the Global Mental Health and Psychiatry Caucus during these very turbulent and acrimonious times. And we need to encourage them to continue their work and not diffuse their focus by adding a subsum, another component under their caucus. So I would hope that all of us in the APA, I've talked to Dr. Belkin, I encouraged him to stay the course. I explained to him that sometimes it may take 1 to 2 years before the APA sees the light of the merits of a very, very good idea. So we will help Dr. Gary Belkin stay the course, and I'll encourage him to resubmit this application next year to the new reference committee. So I think the opportunities for conflict management and conflict resolution abound because the conflicts abound in the world and they're not resolved. And many of them, in fact, have significant psychological components to them. And we as psychiatrists, not alone, but as part of teams, have a great deal to offer to help to bring them to resolution. Thank you for the question, Dr. Sorel.
Yeah, and thank you for that answer. If it's all right with you, Dr. Sorel, I would just like to ask one more question from the chat that we have here. It says, thank you again, Eliot and Dr. McDaniel, or Dr. Sorel, for an excellent review and brief summary of your career. It says, how would you advise early psychiatrists to become more involved in forensic practices, especially in the jails or prison systems?
Get in touch with Dr. Suardi. He's an expert.
That's perfect. That's a perfect segue. Dr. Suardi, we look forward to the opportunity for interviewing you as well and being able to answer this question extensively about how to get involved with forensic practices. I'd like to take this time to thank you all for coming to the WPS podcast. Thank you for your time, Dr. Sorel, and your candidness, as well as your vulnerability with us and sharing your career as well. Dr. Patterson is also here as well. And
please contact also Dr. Patterson as well as Dr. Suardi if you're interested in forensic psychiatry.
Yes, absolutely.